I'm sitting down today with Ahmad Bakhshai, who is the Associate Vice President of Wealth Management here at Wellington-Altus Private Wealth. Welcome,
Thank you.
Ahmad.
Thank you.
We are here today to talk about financial planning, and we've both sat with literally thousands of people over the years, and we've seen many, many situations. We kind of have our 10,000 hours of experience. And I wanted to talk to you about the importance of financial planning for individuals and families. And one of the concepts that you had introduced to me in my office the other day is that there's no such thing as a normal family. Could you talk just a bit about what that means inside of a financial planning context?
Yeah, for sure. Early in my career, one of my mentors told me that, we're not in the money business and we happen to deal with people. It's the other way around. We're in the people business and we just so happen to work with money and things like that. And I think that really changed my mindset early on in my career as to what it is we're actually doing for clients and how we're helping them out. And when you think about it in the context of financial planning, I look at my own family and my family isn't normal. Is yours?
Not hardly.
Is anybody's. So when you arrive at the conclusion that there is no such thing as a normal family, then it becomes very clear that there's no such thing as a normal financial plan because everybody has their own aspirations, goals, concerns. People have their own fears and insecurities. And these all have financial implications. So for those reasons, everybody's financial plan looks different. The tools we use, the products, the strategies we use, those are merely the vehicles that help clients get to their destination, but everybody's on a different journey. And that's what I mean by that.
One of the things that comes from that normal family comment that really hits me too is that a lot of people feel like financial planning is a one size fits all thing. Some people will say, I don't need to have a financial plan. Um, what do you think is the importance for the individual or for the family to have a plan?
Yeah, I think part of that stems from some misconceptions that are out there. So, for example, a lot of times people think a financial plan is synonymous with a retirement plan. And there's a lot of validity to that because for a lot of people, the retirement plan is the pinnacle of their financial plan. It's their number one most important goal. But that's not all what financial planning is about. And for other people who might feel they don't need a financial plan or that there is a one size fits all, um, I can relate to that because that tends to be a common practice in the industry, unfortunately, but it doesn't have to be that way. So retirement planning is just one component of a full financial plan. And sure, maybe a client doesn't need that. Maybe that's not top of mind for them at that time. But a financial plan is really a process and not a destination. So as people go through life, they have different financial planning needs as they go through different life stages. So earlier on, it might be debt management, it might be saving for children's education. Then it might focus more on retirement and estate planning. And I would say probably all of these things are always present, but as people move on through their life and go through different stages, I think certain components of it just tend to dominate a little bit more, and those are where some of the misconceptions come from.
It's interesting because I think that people underestimate the impact of having a plan or not having a plan. Um, I think that one of the largest expenses that we have in life is taxation, and through having a plan, we can actually mitigate a lot of those tax expenses, but we can also make sure that we have enough for ourselves, for our loved ones, all through our lives. Um, a lot of people think that their finances are very simple and that they don't need a plan. Um, if somebody has a very simple situation in their life, what's the advantage of them actually sitting down and formulating a plan for themselves?
Okay, yeah, there's a few things to unpack here. Um, the first thing you mentioned is that I think some people might have or maybe I'm going in a different order, but some people might find that their situation's simple. And sure, it might be simple right now, but again, as they go through those life changes, they may need a plan. And it's very, very important to have that advisor with whom you have a trusted relationship with when the need comes. Because when the need arises, usually there's emotions involved, there's a bit of a time crunch in many cases, and that's not the time to go and find out who that trusted advisor is and try to build a relationship with. So having that in place already is a very good place to be because there's somebody you could turn to. Um, Going back to your earlier question is, taxation and the power of compounding. I think a lot of people underestimate the power of compounding and what it could do for you. So we see this a lot of times with the younger people who think, retirement's too far out and maybe they could wait. Anecdotally, I see a lot of 45-year-olds, 50-year-olds who come and see us and say, we wish we met you at age 20 or age 25. I haven't seen a single one of them that came and said, I'm glad didn't waste my time working with a financial planner until, I, I was in my 40s or 50s. So that just doesn't happen. And small changes early can have very, very large effects later on. So the sooner you engage in this process and the sooner you set your course toward your destination, the more the chances of success, the less compromises you'll have to make later on. If you wait too late, it's going to be a very big shift for you to correct your course and, end up on the at the destination you'd like.
It's interesting because I have a lot of real life examples and people that that in my practice I've helped over the period of 20 years, 25 years. And, seeing people go from being in their 30s to actually retiring. And it's an amazing thing that the people that do have a plan and have stayed the course have done extremely well. Um, the other point that you have is that sometimes life changes are not as fairy tale as they might seem. And I've had a number of people that I've worked with that end up, because of all the people that I've worked with over the years, that they've ended up with bad diagnoses, that all of a sudden had to make very, very difficult decisions. And because we had a good relationship, we were able to help them navigate their finances in a way where when they were lying in their deathbed, they were able to feel safe and secure knowing that everything was taken care of. Um, I think it would have been very difficult for those people to make the decisions that they needed to make as quickly as they needed to make them. It would have been really hard for them to make the right choices. And I think that they may have left this life with more doubts. And it's really amazing the impacts that you have when you do have somebody, a trusted advisor or somebody to help manage your plan. Um, and this is to the point too, that these are not the ultra high net worth people that I've often had experiences with. These are regular people making real life choices. Um, a lot of people think that estate planning is just for the ultra wealthy. Um, what would you say to that?
Sure, estate planning definitely is for the ultra wealthy, but it is for everybody else as well. So I think, again, some of this comes from that paradigm shift. When people think of estate planning, they're thinking about assets and complexity. So they're thinking, if I don't have very large assets or a large or a very complex situation, perhaps I just own my home and have some liquid investments, then I don't need an estate plan. But again, asset distribution is only one component of estate planning. Or another misconception often is, well, people associate estate planning with death and old age. So younger individuals may feel like estate planning is not relevant to them. But estate planning, for example, just a very simple example, includes appointing guardians for your children. So it's very, very important for younger families. Or when we talk about estate planning, we broadly include incapacity planning and substitute decision making. So things like your powers of attorney. And those kinds of incidents can hit anybody at any age. So estate planning is relevant to everybody. But again, the narrow focus tends to be on assets and complexity, whereas it affects everybody.
I guess you could even say that there's disability planning might also be a part of that's life planning. That's not your estate as well.
Absolutely. And going back to your earlier comment about having that relationship in place because life happens. Well, a big part of planning is also planning for the unexpected. And the unexpected could be positive, it could be negative, it could be, landing a dream job at a different location. But without having a plan in place, those things come at you when you're unprepared for them and when you don't have the right structures in place. So financial plan isn't just to plan for how to get to your destination, but it's also what could go wrong, what roadblocks are along the way, when do we have to reroute our journey to get to our destination. And these are things that people don't just think about normally. It's not front and center. They're sort of in the peripherals, in the blind spots, but they happen. I mean, we're here for many, many decades on this earth, and at some point or another, all of us will experience some of these issues. So recognizing that they will come and we just don't know when and in what form is part of the solution.
There's this whole journey of life as well. It's not just again, we're talking about financial planning, not estate planning, talking about financial planning, not disability planning. We're talking about questions that we have over the course of our lifetimes and decisions that we need to make um, that sometimes we forget about. One is financial planning for our kids and how we're going to be supporting them. I think that there's going to be it's more difficult now to make decisions about how to support your kids. I mean, back in the day, it was, oh, get an RESP account, get grants from the government. But now we're seeing a lot of youth that are finding it hard to find jobs, and a lot of people are staying home longer because they can't buy their own homes. Could you comment a bit about planning around how to make sure that you're properly supporting your children?
Sure. And that was a great point you mentioned is that sometimes people say, well, we'll just do things the way we've been doing. So what's been working in the past may not be working currently and may not work in the future because there's changes to demographics. So kids are spending more time in school. There's being more dependent on their parents for a longer period of time. There used to be a time where somebody at age 27 could save for a down payment and buy a house. That's just simply not the reality in Toronto and larger markets these days. So they need help from their parents. People are retiring earlier, people are living longer. So the same solutions or the rules of thumb that people relied on for so long may not be relevant anymore. And the plan needs to be robust and dynamic to be able to make adjustments for those things. And in terms of supporting children, there's differences in attitudes, of course. Every family, again, is different. A lot of parents we see grapple with, you know, we want the children to be motivated, but we want to help them out. And how do you draw that balance? And how do you make sure they don't get taken advantage of and things like that?
Yeah, it's amazing because and I'm so glad that you said that because again, going back to the concept of there is no normal family. There are so many different ways to raise your kids, and all of them are right. It's there's people that want to support their kids from cradle until they have their own children. And then there's people that want to support their kids up to a point, but then they want their kids to be working on their own that go and make it yourself breeds a more robust individual. Both of those situations are right, and I've seen so many different people with so many different ways of conceptualizing that. So I'm really really happy that you mentioned that there's just so many different ways of doing things. Um, a lot of people feel that they don't necessarily need to plan because they have enough assets. Um, any comment on that?
Sure. We see that a lot in our industry where people have abundant resources and they are financially independent, so they don't rely on their employment income to make ends meet. Um, but again, that's only one component of the financial plan. So these individuals typically need tax advice. So that's part of financial planning. They will typically need estate planning. Um, they want to protect those assets. And without having those discussions, um, you're also shooting in the dark. As an advisor, you know, every client will come to you and, you do your risk profile questionnaire and you determine what their needs are. But very few are advisors asking the why questions. So why do you need to earn this rate of return? And how much risk are you really willing to take? Do the clients really understand the risks that are involved in this? And that really helps guide the advisor as to constructing the portfolio that meets the client's needs. Because sometimes especially people say somebody has a liquidity event and they sell a business, their priorities might shift to protecting that wealth from building the wealth, or it might shift to taxation, or it might shift to the discussion we just had about the children. How do we not spoil the kids while providing for them? These are all planning considerations, and we use different tools such as trusts, corporations. Sometimes it's just training and financial management and educating, but these are all financial planning topics. And again, never one size fits all.
One of the things that you mentioned was the fact that some people do get a windfall,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes people get inheritances, sometimes people win lotteries. And as strange as that sounds, I've had 2 clients that have won lotteries. Um, so at the end of the day, if you are getting an inheritance, for example, what would be the first steps for you to manage that?
The first step for me would be to get advice. And by first, I mean the first step you take. That's before you deposit the check. That's before you even, depending on whether the inheritor is also the executor of the estate, for example. So there's different ways you can manage the estate. There's certain tax planning opportunities you have with the deceased, with other beneficiaries, with yourself that you might want to take advantage of. But the first step would for sure to be to get advice, because there's going to be tax implications, there's going to be legal implications. Um, and when we talk about a windfall or an inheritance, there's different, I mean, we've seen people squander them a lot of times. So depending on the size and relative to, your own financial position and whether or not it's expected or not, those could have very different impacts. The more unexpected it is, the more sudden it is, the larger it is, uh, it's treated more like a windfall, like a lottery winning, versus you're expecting something from your grandmother that's going to come. Um, in the first category, when it's a windfall, that's where mistakes get made a lot of times. I mean, we all know the stats with lottery winners and even professional athletes that retire and go bankrupt within a few years. Um, People don't have that training uh, to deal with this level of newfound wealth, and they don't have the experience. And that's where the experiences of advisors like yourself come in. The other issue is when people receive an inheritance, it's usually because a loved one has passed away. So they're also in a state of grief. And we know that when people are grieving, they're not thinking straight the way they normally would. So they're more prone to make mistakes. They might uh, make emotional decisions that may not serve them in the long run. So sometimes people need a cooling off period. And again, that's where an advisor could come in and help them out with those things.
The other thing is that one of the things that you mentioned were legal implications of an inheritance. A lot of people don't understand that when you inherit money, that ends up falling outside of marital assets. And that if you commingle that money at all, that it ends up becoming part of your marital assets. So if ever there is some sort of marriage breakdown, that those assets could become exposed to being part of the matrimonial property that needs to get split, when that might not have been what your grandmother had wanted. So thinking about estates, when we are managing a large family, how do you manage the complexity of estate planning at that point?
I think the best answer is we spend the time. There's a lot of tools and strategies available, but if you get into throwing solutions too quickly, then without really understanding that family's unique situation, then you sort of end up with that situation we had earlier where you're coming up with this cookie cutter, one size fits all solutions. And I think that's a mistake. So by asking the right questions, understanding the family dynamics, then you could use those tools to create a plan that meets everybody's objectives. So really you have to spend the time, and not to toot our own horns here, but as advisors, we tend to have much deeper connections and relationships with our clients. So ultimately, the lawyers may come and implement the plan, but their relationship with the client tends to be a little bit more transactional. So, you might go and see your lawyer and do your will, and then you may never see them again for another 5 years when you go and update your will. And they're not as familiar with your family values, with your situation, as the advisor that you're meeting on a quarterly basis. So I think the advisor should lead that relationship and understand it, and then we could bring in the uh, other professionals to come and execute the plan.
When it comes to working with dual Canadian U.S. citizens, this is just another thing that I want to make sure we discuss. We see I have a lot of people in my practice that are U.S. citizens that are Canadian residents. Could you talk a bit about the complexities of that situation?
For sure, there's definitely additional complexities and considerations for dual citizens, but also individuals who are U.S. persons, so they're green card holders or have some other ties to the U.S. So sometimes it's very simple, sometimes it's just a filing requirement. But then if you miss that requirement and you don't file, there could be negative consequences. And there's a lot of complexity around this because in many cases you have two separate tax legal regimes you have to comply with, and some of those systems talk to each other and are seamless. Some of them are not. So these are all the things that you really have to be aware of, and make sure that you could hold registered accounts that, um, it affects everything, whether you're a beneficiary on a will, whether you're an executor on a will, whether you're a business owner, whether you qualify for the lifetime capital gains exemption. These are all the implications that could exist. And for a lot of people who may be born in the US and lived all their life in Canada, this is just in their blind spot, so they don't understand the implications.
Yeah, I had a client ages ago that was born in the U.S., never lived there, and didn't understand that he had filing obligations. And it's interesting with the whole U.S. Canada situation is that there's rules, particularly around the ownership of your primary residence. In Canada, it's non-taxable. In the U.S., it's taxable. And there's ways around that, but it's really, really important that you fine tune your plan to include all of these different situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And without getting into the specifics, so you might have somebody like that where you have a US citizen who's lived in Canada all their life and there's implications. You could have Canadians who have US property, maybe snowbirds. There's implications. You could have Canadians who hold US securities in large amounts. There's implications there. And the laws are always evolving as well. So that's why you need to stay current with those things. Because, for example, sometimes there's certain legislation out there that has a sunset clause, and we need to see what the updated version is going to look like. So these are all, again, the reasons why you need to be working with an advisor on a consistent basis.
Absolutely. When it comes to insurance, could you just talk briefly about the how insurance can impact people's lives?
Sure. I mean, I could talk about this all day, but that's one of the biggest components of financial planning when we were talking about expecting the unexpected. So, to be very blunt, if your plan is that everything's going to go according to plan, then you don't really have a plan. So, you get in your car to go to your destination, you wear your seatbelt, you make sure there's a spare tire. And again, you're on the longest, most important journey of your life when it comes to your finances. So you should be expecting that maybe something doesn't go exactly according to plan. That's where insurance comes in. And it's not just insurance, there's all kinds of risk management we do daily with our portfolios. So when I complete a plan, we usually look at it and ask ourselves what could go wrong. So we're looking at this plan and it's like this table and it's got these four legs, and we go and shake each leg and see if any of them wobbles or not. What happens if somebody loses their job? What if happens if they get sick? What happens if they get disabled? And these are usually the things that you could deal with insurance. But there's other factors. What happens if interest rates go up? What happens when other you know, uh, events happen. So some of these things we could easily manage with financial management techniques, like portfolio management techniques, or just something as simple as getting a fixed rate mortgage on your house. Um, Other things we can sell off to an insurance company and sell that risk off to them. Other things we can mitigate by, for example, just building in a cushion into the plan, using conservative assumptions, lower than expected rate of return, higher than expected inflation, nice long life expectancy so you don't outlive your savings. And then there are other risks that we just simply cannot mitigate or are just frankly too economical. And we acknowledge them. And that's why we do the updates every few years to the plans as well to make sure that we're current on everything.
To your point about different factors inside of the plan itself, there are certain decisions that need to be made during your lifetime that that we help people to navigate. Thinking about things like powers of attorney, appointing executors. We don't do that. What we do is we help people to get into the frame of mind to make those decisions and then go and speak to their accountants or their lawyers, as the case may be. Could you talk a bit about some of the decisions that are non-financial that go into the plan?
Sure, of course, you mentioned power of attorney, but we put that into the broad estate planning thing category. So again, choosing the guardians for your children. So it's one thing to know the theory that, okay, I can appoint the guardians to my children in my will, and understanding that that's merely a nomination and the guardian doesn't have to accept it, that. But it's also, that's where the experience comes in. Who is the appropriate person? And so it's one thing to know that, okay, I could appoint my children's guardian, but it's another thing to know who's the appropriate person to do that, who's got the same values as me, who has the time to look after my kids the way I'd like them to be looked after, who has the means, the finances to do those things. And same thing goes for powers of attorney, for executors. That's where the experience really comes in, and we could provide some guidance. And of course, our lawyers can as well. But again, the advisor has the deeper relationship and can prepare them for the meeting with the lawyer. So ultimately, it saves the client time and it makes the lawyer's job a little bit easier as well.
And when you do a plan, what does the plan actually look like? What's the finished product?
It's different for every person. When I do a plan, when I go and see the client for the first time, very early in the discussion, I will usually ask this very point blank. And I say, what are you trying to get out of this engagement? So, what needs to happen in a few weeks when we meet again and I present you the findings for you to consider this to have been a worthwhile exercise? And that's again that why question. So, sometimes it's very, um, so for some people, it could be a very simple financial checkup or a second opinion that they're doing things right and they're on the right track. For some people, it might be something a little bit more transactional. So maybe they're selling a business or they have something like that coming up and they want to make sure they're structuring it right. For most people, when you really boil it down, at the end of the day, they want assurance and peace of mind. And that's what they're really looking for. And it comes disguised as an estate plan or as a retirement plan or as an education plan. The output that we produce, going back to your question, is different for each client. So sometimes it's a technical memo. It could just be a two-page memo. For some people, it's more of a financial projection with more numbers and graphs and shapes and tables and charts like that. And it's really different for every person. So when we say every plan is different, we really mean every plan is different. We're not paying lip service to it.
And is there anything, I mean, we've talked about quite a few things here today. Is there anything that you would part on, that any advice that you would give when it comes to helping people to plan?
Get started. A lot of times people wait for the right time to start on doing the planning, or they might be in between jobs. They're just waiting to get to that next point, and then it's going to be smooth sailing from there. That time, that's a myth. That time never comes. And going back to the point about the plan not being a product, it's a process. So a plan is just a process that you have throughout your life, and it gets updated and revised as you go along. But don't let perfection stop you from getting started.
Well, that was a great conversation. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. Great conversation. Thank you.
All right. Fabulous.